The scream came first, sharp, shrill, echoing down the cracked pavement of Maple Avenue like a siren without a source. Then the sound of metal bent, crushed, thrown. By the time Officer Marla Reyes slammed the brakes in front of the North Gate Zoo, a crowd had already gathered behind the taped barrier, eyes wide, phones shaking, faces pale with disbelief. But it was the silence that followed that chilled her the most, an unnatural stillness hanging in the humid morning air, as if the entire city had paused to hold its breath. It was May 12th, a Monday. The kind that usually disappeared without memory, but not this one. Not after what stepped through the shattered emergency gate at 9:42 a.m. The Grizzly had a 7 years old. Over 800 pounds of muscle, rage, and wild instincts dulled only by years of confinement. He had been brought to Northgate after a rescue from illegal captivity in Alaska. A creature torn from his world and penned behind reinforced glass for educational purposes. But that morning, something changed. Something snapped. No one could yet explain how, whether it was faulty bolts, a careless maintenance crew, or the brewing storm that had shorted the electric barrier, but what was certain was this: Rockin' was loose. Marla's boots hit the ground as she approached the torn fence, her eyes locked on the trail of claw marks etched into the dirt. It wasn't just an escape, it was a path, a direction, and the direction pointed into the city. People are running blind. Her radio buzzed with frantic reports from dispatch. We've got sightings near 4th and Alder, pet store window smashed. No injuries yet, no weight correction, one civilian down, unconscious. Marla swallowed hard. This wasn't a tranquilizer and go home situation. This was a walking nightmare, a massive confused predator shoved into a maze of concrete and screaming chaos. She sprinted back to her cruiser, radioing for animal control, SWAT, medics, but deep down she knew they weren't ready. None of them were. Meanwhile, across town, 13-year-old Finn Walters was skipping school, headphones on, hoodie up. He hadn't yet seen the news alerts flooding the city's feeds. He was focused on something else, his sketchpad. He sat alone on a park bench drawing a bear. Not from photos, from memory, from dreams, from the stories. His late grandfather used to tell him about the spirits of the forest, about how, once in a generation, one would walk among humans to remind them they'd forgotten the old laws. He looked up just in time to see the crowd scatter from the far edge of the park, and then he saw him, not a monster, not a villain, a massive figure, coated in dust and blood, eyes wild with confusion and something else lost, rockin' alone, breathing hard, standing in the city like he'd been dropped from another world. Finn didn't move, didn't scream. He stared into the bear's eyes and something flickered. Recognition. No, something deeper, some invisible thread between a boy lost in a world he didn't understand, and a beast who never belonged in cages to begin with. But sirens howled in the distance, and with them came men with guns, orders, and no time for hesitation. And just like that, everything began to spiral. The question now wasn't just how the Grizzly escaped, it was how far he would go, and whether anyone could stop what was coming next. The bear didn't charge, he didn't roar. He just stood there, massive, heaving, quiet, his chest rising and falling like a slow drumbeat in the center of the panicked park. Around him, chaos spread like fire. People screamed and stumbled over each other, fleeing in every direction. Strollers were abandoned. Dogs yanked leashes from their owners' hands, but Finn didn't run, he couldn't. His sketchpad had fallen open at his feet, the unfinished bear staring up at him like it had been waiting. Rockin' turned his head. Their eyes locked again, just a moment, but enough for Finn to feel something shift. The bear wasn't hunting. He wasn't here for blood. His gaze flicked left-right like he was searching for something, or someone. He took one lumbering step, toward the fountain in the middle of the plaza, claws clacking on the stone. Water splashed under his weight. Still no aggression. Then the sirens arrived. A convoy of black SUVs skidded to a halt along the street, tires shrieking. Armed response teams leaped out, rifles drawn, shouting commands that no one could hear over the alarm in their voices. Marla Reyes was among them, sprinting up the hill, gun holstered but hand poised over the grip. She saw the boy, saw the bear. "Hold your fire," she barked, her voice slicing through the static. "There's a kid in the open." But not everyone listened. A rifle clacked from somewhere behind her. Someone panicked, someone younger. A single shot cracked the sky. Rockin' roared, not a war cry, a scream. The bear twisted, jerking his head toward the shooter, shoulder bleeding from a graze. His world shifted from confusion to fear. He charged on toward the crowd, but away, toward the alley beside the coffee shop, toward the only cover he could find. Finn screamed, "No, he's not trying to hurt anyone," but his voice was drowned by the chaos. Marla tackled him to the ground just as another volley of shots rang out. None hit their mark, but the message was clear. Containment was over. Now it was a manhunt, and the hunted had vanished into the city. An hour later, downtown Seattle looked like a scene from a disaster film. News helicopters hovered like vultures overhead. Roads were blocked. Emergency broadcast alerts blared from every screen. Families were told to shelter in place. But in the chaos, Rockin' had disappeared. Tracking teams followed blood droplets along the sidewalk, found a crushed trash bin, a shattered patio door, but no bear. The beast had vanished into the labyrinth of concrete and fear. Inside a command tent, Marla slammed her fist onto the table. This isn't a wild animal on a rampage. He's hurt, he's scared, he's smart. And we've made him think this city wants to kill him. A young officer scoffed. It's a bear, Reyes. It doesn't think it reacts. No, she said sharply. This one thinks. From the far end of the tent, Finn stood beside his mother, wrapped in a shock blanket, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked right at me, like he remembered something, or someone. He didn't want to be here. He just, didn't want to be alone. For a moment, no one spoke. But outside, in the maze of alleyways and forgotten backstreets, the Grizzly was still moving, wounded, desperate, and heading somewhere with purpose. And the city hadn't seen the worst yet. The rain returned at dusk. Not heavy, but steady enough to blur footprints, wash away blood, and make everything look softer than it really was. But the city wasn't soft tonight. It was holding its breath. Street by street, Rockin moved through it like a ghost, soaked and limping but with direction. He didn't crash through buildings or tear through traffic. He stayed low, stuck to alleys and drainage paths, navigating the city with uncanny awareness. Every now and then, he would stop, sniff the air, and listen, not for prey, but for distance, space, safety. He didn't want this. Not the noise, not the sirens, not the concrete that burned his pores. He wanted the forest, the trees, the scent of pine and earth. But that had been stripped from him long ago. And now, with a bullet wound burning in his shoulder and the scent of panic thick in the air, all he had was instinct and something stranger. A feeling he couldn't shake. That he was being watched, but not hunted. Inside the mobile command unit, the atmosphere was unraveling. We've locked down everything from Maine to Jefferson, one officer reported. Thermal drones are up, but we keep losing him in the heat wash. They'll push for lethal force if we don't contain this fast, said another. But Officer Marla Reyes wasn't listening. Her eyes were on Finn, the boy who'd stood within feet of the bear and walked away unscathed. He sat quietly now, sketching again. His fingers moved fast, urgent. When she leaned over, her breath caught. It wasn't just a bear. It was a map. Where did you see this? She asked. Finn pointed at a crumpled flyer beside him. It was in his enclosure. A poster from the conservation center outside the city. It's where they said he was supposed to go before the funding got cut. Reyes's jaw tightened. Green map. Reserve 50 miles north. No public access since 2019. He remembers it. I think he knows it, Finn said, like he's trying to find his way back. Marla turned to her team. He's not just running, he's heading home. By nightfall, the Grizzly had made it to the old industrial zone near the city's northern edge. Forgotten buildings, empty streets, just enough cover to breathe. He collapsed behind a rusted freight container, growling low with pain, but still alert. That's when he heard it. A voice, small, familiar, rockin'. He turned. Finn stepped out from the shadows. Alone, Marla had tried to stop him, but Finn had slipped out during the shift change, leaving behind nothing but a note. He trusted me once. Let me trust him back. The boy didn't carry food or a leash or fear, just the same sketchpad, and he held it out now, pages fluttering in the wind. The bear rose slowly, unsure. Blood dripped down his side, but he didn't lunge. He just looked at the drawing, at the boy, at the absence of threat, and then something cracked. Not bone, not air, but the wall between two lives that never should have crossed in the first place. Rockin stepped forward, lowered his head and nudged the sketchpad with his snout. No roar, no panic. Just breath. Then, headlights burst through the dark. SWAT vans, drones overhead, lasers flickering. Finn screamed, arms wide, blocking their aim. Don't shoot. But orders had already been given, and within seconds, the story teetered on the edge of tragedy. Stand down, Marla's voice tore through the coms, louder than sirens, louder than the buzz of drones overhead. Hold your fire. There's a child in a line of fire. But the red laser dots were already dancing across Rockin's thick hide, and the tension in the air was electric. One wrong move, one flinch, and it would all be over. Marla pushed through the officers, through the armored wall of fear and protocol, until she reached the front line. And there, just beyond the barricade of metal and men, she saw Finn standing in the open, arms outstretched like wings, shielding an 800-pound grizzly bear with nothing but his voice. He's not attacking, Finn shouted, turning slowly so everyone could hear him. He's not a threat. He just wants to go home. The bear made no sound, no sudden lunge. He stood behind the boy, wounded and trembling but still, somehow understanding. One of the younger officers lowered his rifle, uncertain. What are we doing? He muttered, but others still held firm. He's a wild animal, barked a commander behind Marla. If we let this go wrong, that kid dies. On camera. You really want that on your conscience? Marla stepped forward without hesitation. If we fire now, that kid dies either way, because you'll prove to that bear that we're everything he feared, and there'll be no going back. The standoff stretched longer than it should have. Time slowed. Rain fell harder, soaking uniforms and turning dirt to sludge. Cameras rolled. The The world was watching, but all anyone could see was a boy standing beside a monster that refused to act like one. Finally, the order came not from the commander, but from the mayor, patched in via emergency call. Tranquilizers only. Immediate transport to Greenmount Reserve. Do not engage unless provoked. The red dots disappeared. Marla exhaled, knees nearly giving out. She walked slowly toward Finn, careful not to startle the bear. When she reached him, she crouched, speaking low and calm. You did good, kid, but we need to get him help now. He won't last much longer. Finn looked up at her eyes, filled with something older than his years. He trusted me again. Marla nodded. And because of that, he gets to live. Within the hour, Rockin was sedated gently, carefully, without violence. The tranquilizer team worked fast, guiding him onto a padded transport rig. Even unconscious, the bear looked powerful, majestic, but there was no fear now. No rage, only exhaustion. As the truck pulled away, escorted by police and conservation vehicles, Finn rode beside the cage, one hand resting near the mesh wall. Rockin stirred once, groggy but alive, and leaned slightly toward the boy before fading back into sleep. Marla watched them disappear down the road, sirens silent, city lights flickering in their wake. No one cheered. There was no celebration, but for the first time since the escape, there was peace. The next morning, headlines exploded. Boy faces down rampaging Grizzly, and wins zoo escape ends in redemption. Not bloodshed, public demands reforms. After bear nearly shot, and in a quiet valley 50 miles north, deep inside the fenced but free lands of Greenmount Reserve, a grizzly opened his eyes to the smell of pine trees and fresh water. He had made it home, but his story, their story was only just beginning. The road to Greenmount twisted through ancient forest, lined with whispering trees and fog-draped hills. But inside the transport truck it was quiet. No sirens, no orders, just the steady hum of wheels and the slow rhythmic breath of a sleeping giant. Finn sat beside the steel cage, his sketchpad open on his lap, adding final strokes to a drawing he had started before all this began. Rockin' in the wild. Free. As they reached the gates of the reserve, a hush settled over the convoy. The guards to open the barriers slowly, watching as the truck crept forward onto sacred groundland, meant to be untouched, unseen by most. Here, the scars of captivity didn't follow. Here there were no glass walls or screaming crowds, just wind, water, trees, and space. Marla Reyes stood waiting near the drop-off point, arms folded, fatigue etched deep into her features. But when the truck doors opened and she saw the boy step down, mud-splattered, tired but smiling, something inside her softened. The kind of softness only earned in moments that change you. He made it, Finn said simply, stepping aside. As the rig tilted and the cage door unlatched for a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a low groan, a slow shift of weight, and Rockin emerged, blinking at the sky as though he hadn't seen it in years. He sniffed the air, pine needles, running water, the musk of deer and the distant sand, took his first steps into real wilderness. No fences, no walls, just freedom. The reserve rangers watched from a respectful distance, binoculars lowered, eyes wide with awe. One of them whispered, "He's not even limping anymore." But Marla noticed something more. Rockin kept glancing back, in fear, but in acknowledgement, toward Finn. The boy stepped forward slowly, holding out his sketchpad one last time. The bear didn't come close, but he paused. Just long enough for the wind to flip a page, just long enough to leave behind the silence of connection. Then he turned, pushed through the brush, and vanished into the trees. In the weeks that followed, the city moved on, as cities do. Traffic returned, headlines changed, but the story didn't die. It spread. Rockin's escape became a symbol of the dangers of captivity, of the failures in wildlife policy, but also of the unspoken language that sometimes crosses species. Donations to wildlife sanctuaries surged. Zoos faced public outcry. The Greenmount Reserve received emergency funding. People began to ask questions that should have been asked long ago. And Finn, he returned to school. Reluctantly, but he didn't mind the whispers in the hallways or the reporters camped outside, because something had changed inside him too. He knew what it meant to be seen, truly seen by something wild and powerful and good, and nothing after that felt ordinary. On the windowsill of his room, one of his drawings now sat framed. Not a portrait, a moment, a massive grizzly, walking into the woods, and beside it, a boy, watching him go. They didn't speak the same language, but they understood each other just fine, because sometimes the wild doesn't need words to remind us of what we've forgotten, that freedom is worth fighting for, that fear doesn't always need to win, and that even the most dangerous creature might just be lost, not violent, and that sometimes a boy with a sketchpad can save the world by simply believing in what others are too afraid to understand.